In episode 3 of the Buckland Valley Goldfield, we take a closer look at the lives of the Chinese miners, some of their occupation areas, as well as some of the artefacts that they've left behind. We also examine the events of the day of 1857 of the Buckland Riot, where the topography of the valley played a significant role in the unfolding of the events of the day. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like, share and subscribe. And as always, we do appreciate the comments. Happy exploring and hope to see you real soon. Cheerio.
In 1856, the number of Chinese miners on the Buckland diggings was relatively small, but by early 1857, large numbers of Chinese diggers were crowding into this narrow valley. Now, the European miners actually resented the Chinese diggers for their cultural differences. Often they were resented for their long pigtails or their traditional strange foods and their ornate joss houses. But when it boils down to it, the European miners resented the Chinese for the fact that they were opening up ground that the European diggers would open up later on. Now, troubles began brewing some months before the riots, and some of the European population were calling for steps to rid the Chinese from the diggings. In May, a small group of European miners, under the cover of darkness and with blackened faces, attacked a camp of about 30 Chinese miners at the junction. They tore down their tents and burned a lot of their possessions. They also attacked the Chinese with sticks and stones and deprived them of their pigtails. During this affray, it was said that one Chinese miner was actually murdered and his body dumped down a shaft. At this time, there was only one police constable stationed on the Buckland diggings. On the morning of the 4th of July 1857, some 80 to 90 miners gathered at Tansville's hotel near the junction for a meeting about the Chinese problem. The crowd was addressed by Jonathan Thomas Bell, and he stated at the end of this meeting that either the whites or the Chinese had to leave the Buckland diggings. At the end of the meeting, a mob of 40 agitated European miners armed themselves with axe and pick handles and lumps of wood and headed up past the junction to Loudon's Flat. This was the highest Chinese camp on the Buckland, and here were there some 20 tents and stores of the Chinese diggers. Here the European miners set their tents ablaze, burning all their personal possessions and kicking all their foodstuffs about. The Chinese were evicted and chased by these European miners back down towards the junction. By the time the riders reached the junction, they'd increased to 100 in number, and here they divided into two groups. On each side of the river, they systematically herded the Chinese down this valley, leaving in their wake a scene of burnt tents and scattered Chinese foodstuffs. The European diggers now had begun looting the personal possessions of the Chinese miners, taking their gold, and they also took pigtails as trophies. On reaching Joss House Hill, the rioters set their torches to the recently opened Joss House and razed it and the surrounding Chinese camp to the ground. The rioters then continued to herd the remaining Chinese down the valley, and at a point near the present-day Buckland Bridge there was an old log crossing. It was here a bottleneck of fleeing Chinese miners had gathered. Singly, one by one, they crossed this log, and it was said many plunged to their deaths and drowned in the raging Buckland River. It was also at this point a small group of European sympathisers actually raised their guns at the rioters and allowed the Chinese to cross one by one. If it weren't for the gallant effort of these small group of Europeans, many further Chinese lives may have been lost. After the Buckland Riot, there were 3 official camps set up on the Buckland for the protection of the Chinese. And we're actually on the lower Buckland now at the site of the largest of those Chinese camps. And this one was known as the Macau Camp. We've got the Buckland Road just up here behind us. And off of that, at a right angle, was a branch road. And that branch road was the main street of the Macau Camp. If you came back here a little bit over 100 years ago, you could walk down that main street and you'd find opium dens, butchers, bootmakers and general grocers. And all about the outside of that main street were the private dwellings of the Chinese miners. Now the Chinese also had a joss house or temple situated down towards the river a little bit further. And in the early 1900s, the Phoenix bucket dredge wanted that piece of land to dredge up and extract all of that gold that was under that joss house. So the Chinese decided to lift up that building and bung it on the other side of the road. But they did this with a grand style and actually held a small little festival to celebrate this auspicious event. And they even borrowed the white linen and cutlery from Weston's Hotel down the road to help celebrate that. chose to live in designated camps where there's some level of protection, and they're also close at hand to services such as their grocers and their store provisions, and also their Chinese temples. But many also lived out on the fringes in smaller groups of huts, and sometimes in lone huts like this one here, where they are much closer to their claims. Now, many of these hut sites were exposed during the recent bushfires, and this has actually made them vulnerable to bottle diggers. And this particular site has been dug over by bottle diggers, and a heap of rubbish has been put aside. Now, this is actually important archaeological evidence that gives us a remarkable insight into the occupants of that hut. We've got here like basic tools to start with. Here we've got some sort of sledgehammer. It's actually been broken and cracked and then thrown in their rubbish pit. We've also got numerous shovels. You often come across many of these in your walks around the Buckland. There's probably thousands of them sitting in different places all about the field. We've also got large quantities of alcohol bottles. And alcohol was a pretty big thing on the Buckland diggings, as it was on any diggings. It was a social lubricant, but more importantly, it was a relaxer for the miners at the end of a hard day's toil. More importantly, amongst all of this domestic rubbish, are artefacts relating to the Chinese who occupied this hut site. Now, basically, we've got a few groups of artefacts here, and this first group is the food storage containers. And this particular one was made of stoneware with a brown glaze, and it actually was probably the size of a large basketball, or if not larger. And this contained foods like pickled eggs, and say pickled cabbage and so on. Another one of these food storage vessels is this. This is probably like a squat little ginger jar with a sort of a wider mouth opening on it. And this stored ginger, and it also probably stored relishes and so on, things that they might even add to their main dishes. And this is a larger piece from one of those other big stone food storage vessels. Now, on the table of the Chinese, we had this beautiful celadonware. This sort of nice greeny, wintry green colour. And on the bottom here, we've got this beautiful maker's name, probably made by someone back in China and brought out to the goldfields. We've also got another rice bowl. They would have ate that rice like that. And here we can see these beautiful hand-painted cobalt blue on the lighter background. One of the most interesting things, though, exposed by these bottle hunters is this. And this is actually the remains of an opium pipe. Now, this actually sat on a bamboo stem, and they placed the opium on top and smoked it like so. Now, opium sort of got a bit of a dark side to it, but really, opium was just a way for these Chinese miners to relax and ease the pain of a hard day's toil. Now, with all of these artefacts, we're able to get a wonderful insight, and it's just absolutely brilliant what we can read into these sites just from these few bits and pieces.